Shh, it's all right. I'll protect you.
She hid in the most feared Duke's carriage to escape a forced marriage. As the man hunting her peered through the glass with a lantern, the Duke pulled her close and whispered, "I'll protect you." Jasmine didn't know the man sitting in the shadowed corner of that black carriage was Graham Johnston, the scarred Duke of Blackwood, the one nobleman all of London whispered about in terror. She only knew that Torrin Campbell, the man she was being sold to in marriage, was going to own her body to settle her family's debts. The lace of her wedding gown was still damp with tears. She had run 3 blocks in satin slippers before diving into a carriage bearing a crest that made grown men cross the street. She collapsed onto the plush velvet floor, shaking. That's when she smelled it. Expensive tobacco and rain-soaked leather. She wasn't alone. She looked up. Sharp, chiseled features marked by jagged red scars ran across his cheek. His eyes held the kind of stillness that came before violence. He watched her like a predator assessing prey. Then a shadow fell over the window. Torrin, his face pressed against the glass, lantern raised, hunting. He started tapping the window, slow and deliberate. "Jasmine, darling." His voice came muffled through the glass. "Come out now, and I'll be gentle," she whimpered, waiting for the Duke to throw her out. Instead, Graham leaned forward, his gloved hand resting on her trembling shoulder. "He will not touch you," he whispered. "I'll protect you." He tapped the roof twice. The carriage moved forward, gliding past a furious Torrin. But as they drove into the night toward Blackwood Hall, Jasmine couldn't shake one question. Why had his carriage been parked so conveniently near the church? If you're ready for more stories where the unexpected happens, where the forgotten rise, and where the underdogs turn the game around, make sure to hit that subscribe button now. You don't want to miss what's coming next. And hey, drop a comment below, let me know where you're watching from and what's on your mind. Your thoughts are always welcome here, and I'd love to hear your take on tonight's story. Don't forget to like, share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the drama, the revenge, and the secrets waiting to be uncovered. Welcome to the family. Now, let's dive in. The morning of the wedding, Jasmine woke to the sound of her mother weeping in the hallway. It wasn't the gentle crying of a mother sending her daughter off to happiness. It was the broken, guilty sobbing of a woman who had sold her child to save her own skin. The Anderson estate had been crumbling for years. Her father's gambling debts, her brother's failed business ventures, the mortgage payments they could no longer meet, and then Torrin Campbell had appeared like a vulture circling carrion, offering to clear every debt in exchange for one thing: Jasmine. She had met him only twice before the wedding was arranged. The first time, he had looked at her the way men looked at horses at auction, assessing her teeth, her posture, her ability to bear children. The second time, he had cornered her in the library and put his hand on her throat, not squeezing, just resting there as a reminder of what was to come. "You'll learn quickly," he had whispered against her ear, his breath reeking of brandy. "Obedient wives live comfortable lives. Disobedient ones learn to fear the dark." Now, as her mother and 2 maids laced her into the ivory gown, Jasmine felt like she was being sewn into her own burial shroud. The lace was suffocating. The corset crushed her ribs. The veil hung over her face like a widow's mourning cloth. "You look beautiful, dear," her mother said, but she couldn't meet Jasmine's eyes in the mirror. The church was only 4 blocks from the Anderson townhouse. Jasmine was meant to walk there with her father, a grand procession through the streets so all of London could see the Campbell fortune being secured. But when she stepped outside, her father wasn't waiting. He had already gone ahead to drink himself into enough courage to hand her over. She walked alone, flanked by 2 footmen who weren't there to escort her. They were there to make sure she didn't run. But Jasmine had learned something in her 22 years of being traded and bargained over. She had learned to wait, to watch, to find the single moment when the predators looked away. They were halfway to the church when a street vendor's cart overturned, spilling apples across the cobblestones. The footmen both turned to look. 3 seconds. That's all she had. Jasmine ran. The satin slippers were useless on the wet stones. Her gown tangled around her legs. She tore the veil from her face and let it fly away like a ghost. Behind her, she heard shouting. The footmen had noticed. They would catch her in minutes. She turned down an alley, her lungs burning, her vision blurring with tears. She had no plan, no destination. She just knew she would rather die in the gutter than become Torrin Campbell's property. That's when she saw it. At the end of the alley, parked in the shadow of the church's stone walls, sat a black carriage. Not just any carriage. The lacquered doors bore a crest in silver and crimson, a wolf's head crowned with thorns. Even Jasmine, who knew little of London's nobility, recognized that symbol, the Blackwood crest. The mark of Graham Johnston, the Duke whose name mothers used to frighten children into obedience. The Duke who had returned from war with a face full of scars and a reputation for cruelty that made even the king tread carefully. The carriage door was slightly open, as if waiting. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She dove inside, pulling the door shut behind her and collapsing onto the floor between the seats. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst through her ribs. She pressed herself into the smallest space possible, her wedding gown bunching around her like crumpled paper. The interior smelled of expensive tobacco and rain-soaked leather, rich, masculine, dangerous. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to control her breathing. Maybe the carriage was empty. Maybe she could hide here until Torrin gave up the search. Maybe. You're bleeding on my upholstery. Jasmine's eyes snapped open. Her gaze traveled up from polished black boots to perfectly tailored trousers, to the ornate black velvet coat embroidered with silver threading, and finally to the face that had become London's favorite nightmare. Graham Johnston didn't look surprised to find a woman in a wedding dress hiding in his carriage. He looked mildly inconvenienced, the way a man might look at a stray cat that had wandered into his study. The scars were worse than the rumors suggested. 3 jagged lines cut across his left cheek, angry and red against his pale skin, running from his temple to his jaw like claw marks. His eyes were dark, cold, assessing her with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Jasmine started, but her voice came out as a broken whisper. "You're the Anderson girl," Graham said. It wasn't a question. "The one being sold to Campbell today." She nodded, unable to form words. Graham leaned back against the seat, his expression unreadable. "Does he know you're here?" "No. I ran. I didn't know where else." She stopped, realizing how pathetic she sounded. Please, don't send me back to him." "Why would I do that?" Graham's tone was conversational, almost bored. "Campbell's business is not my concern." "Then let me go," Jasmine whispered. "Please, just let me go and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "You misunderstand." Graham's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not keeping you because of Campbell. I'm keeping you because you're currently trespassing in my carriage, and I don't make decisions under pressure." Before Jasmine could respond, voices erupted outside. Footsteps pounded against the cobblestones. Through the tinted window, she saw shadows moving, searching. "Check every carriage." That was Torrin's voice, sharp with fury. She couldn't have gone far in that dress. Jasmine's blood turned to ice. She looked up at Graham, her eyes pleading, but the Duke's expression hadn't changed. He simply watched her with that same clinical detachment, as if waiting to see what she would do. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow fell across the window. Jasmine stopped breathing. The door handle rattled. In one smooth motion, Graham reached down and pulled Jasmine up from the floor, positioning her on the seat beside him. Before she could process what was happening, he draped his heavy cloak over her, covering her entirely, and wrapped one arm around her shoulders, holding her against his side. To anyone looking through the window, it would appear the Duke was simply sitting alone, his cloak bunched beside him. "Stay still," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Don't breathe too loudly." The door swung open. Cold air rushed in, and with it, Torrin Campbell's voice. "Your Grace." Torrin's tone was carefully respectful, but Jasmine could hear the rage simmering beneath it. "Forgive the intrusion. I'm searching for someone. A young woman in a wedding dress. Have you seen her?" "I've seen several young women today," Graham replied, his voice flat and disinterested. "London is full of them. This one is my bride. She's confused. Not well. I need to find her before she hurts herself." How tragic. There was no sympathy in Graham's words. "But as you can see, Campbell, I'm alone, and I have an appointment I'm already late for. Close the door. If I could just close the door." The temperature in the carriage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Graham hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. But something in those 3 words made even Jasmine's heart stutter. There was a long pause. Then Torrin's footsteps retreated, and the door clicked shut. Graham didn't move, neither did Jasmine. They sat in silence as the voices outside faded, as the search moved further down the street. Only when the sounds had completely disappeared did Graham pull the cloak away. Jasmine looked up at him, her face wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Why did you—" "I don't like Campbell," Graham said simply. He tapped the roof of the carriage twice. The horses began to move, smooth and silent. "And I don't like men who hunt women through the streets like animals. Where are we going?" "Blackwood Hall." "But you can't—" Jasmine's mind raced. "I have nowhere to go. No money. My family will disown me for running. Torrin will tell everyone I'm mad, that I'm—" "Then it's fortunate you're no longer their concern." Graham looked at her fully for the first time, his scarred face impassive. "You're mine now." The words should have terrified her. They sounded like ownership, like she'd simply traded one master for another. But there was something in the way he said it, something matter-of-fact and final, that felt different from Torrin's possessive threats. Graham pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "You're still bleeding." Jasmine looked down. Her hands were scraped raw from her fall into the carriage, small cuts weeping blood onto her torn gloves. She took the handkerchief with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. Graham said nothing. He simply turned to look out the window as the carriage carried them away from the church, from Torrin, from the life that had almost destroyed her. The ride to Blackwood Hall took nearly an hour. Jasmine spent most of it in silence, pressed against the far corner of the seat, trying to process what had just happened. She kept expecting Graham to speak, to explain, to make demands, but he remained perfectly still, his attention fixed on something outside the window that she couldn't see. When they finally passed through the iron gates bearing the Blackwood crest, Jasmine felt her breath catch. The estate stretched before them like something from a dark fairy tale. The hall itself was massive, built from gray stone that seemed to absorb the afternoon light rather than reflect it. Towers rose at each corner, and narrow windows stared down like watchful eyes. It was beautiful, in a haunting, austere way, like a cathedral built for a god of winter. The carriage stopped at the front entrance. 2 servants in dark livery appeared immediately, opening the door and bowing low. Graham stepped out first, then turned back to offer Jasmine his hand. She hesitated, looking down at her ruined wedding dress, her bloodied hands, her missing slippers. She must look like something dragged from the Thames. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't go in there looking like this. Everyone will see exactly what I allow them to see," Graham said. His hand remained extended, steady and patient. Nothing more. Jasmine took his hand and stepped down onto the gravel drive. Her feet were bare, cut from running through the streets, and she winced as small stones pressed into her skin. Without a word, Graham swept her up into his arms. Jasmine gasped, instinctively clutching at his coat. "Your Grace, I can walk. Not on those feet." He carried her up the stone steps as if she weighed nothing, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Mrs. Thornton," he called as they entered the main hall. A severe-looking woman in a black dress appeared from a side corridor. She took one look at Jasmine, and her expression shifted from surprise to something almost motherly. "Prepare the East Wing guest suite," Graham ordered. "Have a bath drawn, clothes laid out, and send for Dr. Morrison to tend to her hands and feet. At once, Your Grace." Mrs. Thornton's eyes swept over Jasmine with professional efficiency. "Will the young lady be staying long?" "Indefinitely," Graham said. He set Jasmine down gently in a chair near the massive fireplace. "See that she has everything she requires." Mrs. Thornton curtsied and hurried away, snapping orders to servants who materialized from the shadows. Jasmine looked up at Graham, who was already turning to leave. "Wait. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Graham paused. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost distant. "I want you to rest, to heal, to remember what it feels like to be safe." He glanced back at her, his scarred face half in shadow. "We'll discuss expectations tomorrow. For now, you need to recover from your escape. But Torrin Campbell is no longer your concern. He's mine." Something dark flickered in Graham's eyes. "And I've been waiting a very long time to settle accounts with him." Before Jasmine could ask what that meant, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Mrs. Thornton returned with 3 maids in tow. They helped Jasmine to her feet and led her through a maze of corridors, up a grand staircase, and into the East Wing. The suite they brought her to was larger than her family's entire townhouse. The walls were papered in deep emerald silk, and a canopy bed draped in velvet dominated one side of the room. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, and through the tall windows, she could see the estate's grounds stretching toward dark woods in the distance. The maids worked efficiently, helping her out of the ruined wedding dress and into a steaming bath that smelled of lavender and something medicinal. They washed her hair, treated her cuts, and wrapped her feet in soft bandages. When the doctor arrived, he was brisk but gentle, checking for broken bones and declaring that she would heal perfectly with rest. By the time they dressed her in a soft nightgown and robe, Jasmine could barely keep her eyes open. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The maids tucked her into the massive bed, and she sank into pillows that felt like clouds. "Rest now," Mrs. Thornton said gently, adjusting the blankets. "You're safe here. His Grace has given orders that no one is to disturb you." Jasmine wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what was happening, but sleep pulled her under before she could form the words. She woke to late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: the wedding, the flight, the carriage, Graham's scarred face and cold eyes. A dress had been laid out on the chair near the bed. Deep burgundy wool, simple but elegant, with none of the suffocating layers of her wedding gown. Jasmine dressed slowly, her body aching but healing. Her feet were still tender, but the bandages had been changed while she slept. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice hoarse. A young maid entered, curtsying quickly. "His Grace requests your presence at dinner, miss, if you're feeling well enough." Jasmine's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't ready to face Graham, to hear what he wanted from her, what price her rescue would carry. But hiding in this room wouldn't change anything. "I'll come," she said. The maid led her back through the corridors, down the grand staircase, and into a dining room that could have seated 30 people. But only 2 places had been set, one at the head of the long mahogany table and one to its right. Graham was already there, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey. He had changed from his morning clothes into a dark dinner jacket, and in the candlelight, his scars seemed less angry, more like old wounds that had learned to live with the flesh around them. "Miss Anderson," he said, turning as she entered. "I trust you slept well." "I did. Thank you. Jasmine moved to her seat, unsure of the protocol. Your Grace, I need to understand. Sit first, eat, then we'll talk. Graham took his own seat and gestured to the servants waiting in the shadows. They brought out the first course, a rich soup that smelled of herbs and cream. They ate in silence for several minutes. Jasmine found she was ravenous, her body demanding fuel after the trauma of the morning. The food was exquisite, each course more elaborate than the last, but she barely tasted it. Her mind was racing with questions. Finally, after the main course had been cleared and a light dessert had been served, Graham set down his fork and looked at her directly. You want to know why I brought you here? He said. Yes. The simple answer is that I don't like Torrin Campbell. The complicated answer would take all night. Graham swirled the wine in his glass, watching the candlelight catch in the liquid. But I think you deserve at least some truth. I'd appreciate that. Campbell and I have history. Years ago, he tried to force another young woman into marriage. She had no family to protect her, no means to escape. When I learned of it, I intervened. Graham's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I was younger then, more direct in my methods. Campbell took offense to my interference. The scars, Jasmine whispered. He hired men to teach me a lesson about meddling in other people's business. They cornered me in an alley, much like the one you ran through today. Graham touched his scarred cheek absently. I survived. The girl didn't. Campbell's wedding went forward, and she died 6 months later. The official cause was pneumonia, but everyone knew the truth. Jasmine felt sick. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand that when I saw you in my carriage, running from the same man, wearing the same terrified expression, he stopped, something almost human flickering across his face before the mask returned. I won't make the same mistake twice. So this is revenge? Against Torrin? Partially. Graham leaned back in his chair. But it's also practical. You needed safety. I can provide it. In exchange, you'll play a role. What role? My Duchess. He said it simply, as if announcing the weather. Not in truth, not yet, but in appearance. Let London believe we've married in secret. Let Campbell and your family think you've found protection they can't touch. You want to use me as bait, Jasmine said slowly. I want to give you a life where you're not sold like livestock. Graham's voice hardened. You can stay here, live in comfort, and in return, you'll attend social functions at my side. You'll convince society that the scarred Duke has finally found someone brave enough to bear his presence. And Campbell will have to watch, knowing he lost you to the one man in London who isn't afraid of him. And when your revenge is complete? Jasmine asked. What happens to me then? That depends entirely on you. Graham stood, walking to the window that overlooked the dark gardens. You can stay. You can leave. You can marry someone else if you choose. But you'll do it from a position of strength, not desperation. Jasmine studied him, this scarred Duke who spoke of violence and protection in the same breath. There was something broken in him, she realized. Something that had never healed right after that alley, after that girl's death. One condition, she said finally. Graham turned to face her, one eyebrow raised. I want the truth, always. No more half-explanations or convenient omissions. If I'm going to play your Duchess, I need to know exactly what game we're playing. Something almost like respect crossed Graham's features. Agreed. Then I accept. Good. Graham returned to the table, refilling both their glasses. There's one more thing you should know. You're not a prisoner here, Jasmine. You're free to move through the estate, to use the library, the gardens, whatever you wish. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why do all this for a stranger? Graham was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because you deserve to take up space in this world, not shrink from it, not apologize for existing. And every minute you lived in fear of Campbell was a minute you were taught to make yourself smaller. He looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. I won't have that in my house. Here, you will remember what it means to breathe freely. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough today. Thank you, she said softly, for giving me a choice. You always had a choice. I'm just making sure you have the power to enforce it. They finished dinner in companionable silence, and when Graham walked her back to her suite, he paused at the door. Tomorrow, we'll need to make this official. Spread the word about our marriage. It will cause a scandal, but scandal is the point. And Torin? We'll come for you. Probably within the week. Graham's expression turned cold. Let him come. I've been waiting years for him to give me an excuse to destroy him. As Jasmine closed the door to her suite, she realized she wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt like she had an ally. Not a savior, not a master, but someone who saw her as an equal in whatever war was coming. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark grounds, at the lights of London glowing in the distance. Somewhere out there, Torin Campbell was plotting. Her family was probably drowning in shame. Society was already beginning to whisper about the runaway bride. But here, in Blackwood Hall, she was safe. And more than that, she was beginning to understand that Graham Johnston might be the most dangerous man in London. But he was dangerous in her defense. It was only 3 days before Torin came. Jasmine was in the library when she heard the commotion at the front entrance. Raised voices, the sound of boots on marble, and then Graham's low, controlled tone cutting through the chaos. She set down her book and moved to the doorway, her heart racing. Torin Campbell stood in the main hall, flanked by 2 men who looked like hired muscle. He was dressed impeccably, every inch the wealthy gentleman, but his eyes were wild with rage. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where is my bride?" "Your bride?" Graham descended the staircase slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Campbell. There is no bride of yours in this house. Don't play games with me, Johnston. I know she's here. The whole city is talking about it. You stole her from the church, spirited her away. I stole nothing. The lady sought refuge, and I granted it. What happens in my home is no business of yours." "She was mine!" Torin's voice cracked with fury. "The contract was signed. The debts were settled. She belongs to me." Belonged. Graham reached the bottom of the stairs, positioning himself between Torin and the rest of the house. "Past tense. I'm afraid the lady has changed her circumstances. This is kidnapping. Theft. I'll have you brought up on charges. Will you?" Graham's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Please do. I'd very much enjoy a public trial, where we examine exactly why Miss Anderson preferred to throw herself on the mercy of a scarred stranger rather than marry you. I imagine the testimony would be fascinating." Torin's face went purple. "You have no right. I have every right. Miss Anderson is under my protection now, as my wife." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jasmine's breath caught. They had discussed this plan, but hearing Graham say it out loud, hearing the finality in his voice, made it real. "You married her?" Torin's laugh was ugly. "You expect anyone to believe that the scarred duke, the man who hasn't touched a woman in 5 years, suddenly married some runaway girl? I expect you to leave my house." Graham took a step forward, and somehow, despite being the same height as Torin, he seemed to tower over him. "And if you ever come near my wife again, if you so much as speak her name in public, I will burn your reputation to ashes. I will expose every dirty business deal, every bribed official, every woman you've terrorized. I will make it my life's work to ensure you die penniless and alone." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Graham smiled, and it was the coldest expression Jasmine had ever seen. "Test me, please. I'm hoping you will." Torin looked like he wanted to lunge forward, to throw a punch, to do something to salvage his pride, but Graham's 2 guards had materialized from the shadows, their hands resting meaningfully on their sword hilts. "This isn't over," Torrance spat. "No," Graham agreed. "It's just beginning. Now get out of my home before I have you thrown out." Torrance stormed toward the door, his hired men scrambling to follow. But at the threshold, he turned back, his eyes searching the shadows until they found Jasmine standing in the library doorway. "You'll regret this," he said to her. "When he tires of you, when he throws you out with nothing, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be there to catch you." "Good," Jasmine said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'd rather starve in the streets than spend another moment in your presence." Torrance's face twisted with rage, but Graham had already positioned himself between them again. "Leave, now." The door slammed shut behind Torrance and his men. The hall fell into ringing silence. Graham turned to look at Jasmine, his scarred face unreadable. "That went well." Jasmine laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that bubbled up from her chest. "You threatened to destroy him." "I did. Can you actually do all those things? Expose his business deals?" "I already have people gathering evidence. It will take time, but yes." Graham walked toward her slowly. "Are you all right? I know that wasn't easy." "I'm fine." Jasmine realized it was true. She had been terrified that seeing Torrance again would break her, would send her back into that place of fear and helplessness. But standing here, with Graham between her and danger, she had felt something else entirely. Power. "Thank you for sending him away. Thank you for standing your ground." That took courage. They stood there in the hallway, the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, and Jasmine realized that something had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound by convenience. They were allies, partners in whatever came next. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Graham's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Now, we let London whisper. We let Campbell rage, and we prepare for the real battle to come, which is making them all believe that the scarred Duke has finally found someone who sees past the monster to the man beneath." He looked at her steadily. "Think you can manage that, Duchess?" Jasmine met his gaze, seeing not the scars or the cold reputation, but the man who had sheltered her, who had given her a choice, who was fighting a war against cruelty in his own brutal way. "I think," she said slowly, "that won't be as difficult as you imagine." For the first time since they met, Graham smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his face completely. The scars became just lines. The coldness melted into something almost warm. "Good," he said, "because I have a feeling Campbell isn't going to let this go quietly." "Let him come," Jasmine said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. "I'm not running anymore." Graham nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "No, you're not. Welcome to Blackwood, Duchess. The real fight starts now. If you're still here after all that, it shows you find the story interesting. If so, then do me this one favor. Hit subscribe on Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. Also, drop a comment. Tell me, what did you think of Jasmine's choice? Would you have climbed that ledge?" I read every single comment. Your thoughts aren't just engagement stats to me. They matter. The week after Torrance's visit passed in strange quietness. Jasmine settled into Blackwood Hall, like a bird learning it could finally stretch its wings. She explored the library, walked the gardens despite the autumn chill, and slowly began to understand that Graham had meant what he said. She wasn't a prisoner. She was simply there, taking up space, breathing freely. But questions gnawed at her. Why had Graham's carriage been parked so conveniently near the church? How had he known she would run? And what exactly was his connection to her family's debts? The answers came on a gray Thursday afternoon when Jasmine was searching the library for a book Graham had mentioned at breakfast. She pulled out a volume on military history, and behind it, wedged between two shelves, was a leather folder that had clearly been hidden. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were documents, legal papers, contracts, loan agreements. And there, in her father's shaky handwriting, was a debt notice dated 3 years prior. The amount made her stomach turn. Her father had borrowed an enormous sum from Graham Johnston, secured against the Anderson estate and, according to a clause near the bottom, repayable through either monetary means or marital alliance. Jasmine sank into a chair, the folder slipping from her fingers. Graham hadn't simply rescued her from Torrin. He had owned her family's debt all along. The carriage parked near the church wasn't coincidence. It was calculation. He had been waiting for her to run, knowing she would have no choice but to seek refuge with him. She had traded one owner for another. The door to the library opened. Graham entered, already speaking before he saw her face. "I thought you might want to ride out to the—" He stopped. His gaze dropped to the scattered documents on the floor. His expression didn't change, but something shuddered behind his eyes. "You weren't supposed to find those," he said quietly. "No, I'm sure I wasn't." Jasmine stood, her legs unsteady. "How long, Graham? How long have you owned my family?" 3 years. Your father came to me desperate. The other creditors were threatening violence. I offered terms that would give him time, terms that included me. A clause. One option among several. He never had to invoke it. Graham moved closer, his hands at his sides. "But when I learned he was selling you to Campbell instead, I made sure my carriage would be where you needed it. You manipulated everything." The betrayal burned in her chest. The rescue, the protection, all of it was just you claiming what you thought you'd already purchased. "No." Graham's voice turned sharp. "If I wanted to claim a debt, I would have shown up at your father's door with those papers and demanded payment. I didn't. I waited to see what you would choose." "What I would choose?" Jasmine laughed bitterly. "I had no choice. I was running from one monster straight into the arms of another, who just happened to be more polite about his ownership." Graham flinched. It was slight, barely visible, but she saw it. "Is that what you think? That I brought you here to own you? What else am I supposed to think?" She gestured at the documents. "You bought my family's debt specifically so you could position yourself as my savior. You played the hero while holding my chains the entire time. I bought your family's debt to keep them from losing everything to loan sharks, who would have sold you to someone far worse than Campbell." Graham's composure cracked slightly. "And I kept those papers hidden because I never intended to use them. Your father's debt died the day you entered this house. The contract is void. You don't owe me anything." "Then why keep the documents at all?" "Because I'm a fool who couldn't bring myself to burn the only legal connection I had to you." The admission came out rough, almost angry, because some broken part of me wanted proof that you were supposed to be here, even if the reasons were wrong. Jasmine stared at him. For the first time since she'd met him, Graham looked genuinely vulnerable. The cold mask had fallen away, leaving only a scarred man who suddenly seemed much younger than his reputation suggested. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. Graham was silent for a long moment. Then he bent down, gathered all the documents from the floor, and walked to the fireplace. Without hesitation, he threw them into the flames. "Believe this," he said, watching the papers blacken and curl. "You are free, completely. If you want to leave Blackwood, I'll give you money, references, whatever you need to start over anywhere in the world. If you want to stay, you stay as my equal, not my property. The choice is entirely yours. And the marriage? The revenge against Torrin? Forget it. All of it." The papers had turned to ash. "I won't use you as a weapon in my war with Campbell. You've been used enough." Jasmine watched the last of the documents disintegrate. Her anger was still there, but it had shifted into something more complicated. Graham had manipulated the situation, yes, but he was also burning away any claim he had over her, destroying evidence that could have legally bound her to him. "What do you want, Graham?" she asked. "Really?" He turned to face her, and for once, his expression was completely open. I want you to choose to be here, because you want to be, not because you're trapped. I want to give you the life that girl from 5 years ago never got. And I want to stop waking up every morning wondering if I'll fail to protect someone again. So this is about guilt. Partially. But it's also about you. He took a step closer. You stood in that hallway and faced Campbell without flinching. You called me out just now instead of playing the grateful refugee. You're stronger than you know, Jasmine. And I want to see what you become when no one is standing in your way. She studied him, this complicated man who dealt in violence and protection with equal measure. If I stay, I need the truth. Always. No more hidden documents or convenient omissions. Agreed. And we renegotiate the terms of this marriage. If I'm going to be your Duchess, it's because I choose it, not because you orchestrated it. Agreed. And you have to tell me the real story. All of it. What happened with that girl 5 years ago, and why destroying Campbell matters so much to you. Graham's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Tonight, over dinner, I'll tell you everything. Then I'll stay, Jasmine said. For now, we'll see what comes next. Something like relief crossed Graham's face. He extended his hand, formal and steady. Partners, then. Jasmine took his hand. His grip was warm despite the cold reputation. Partners. That evening, over wine and too much honesty, Graham told her everything. The girl's name had been Elizabeth. She was a merchant's daughter with no family and no dowry. Campbell had wanted her for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with controlling her father's shipping connections. When Elizabeth tried to refuse, Campbell began a campaign of terror. Anonymous threats. Accidents that weren't accidents. Her father's business mysteriously catching fire. Graham, younger and more idealistic, had tried to intervene. He challenged Campbell publicly, threatened to expose his tactics. In response, Campbell hired men to corner Graham in an alley. They held him down and carved up his face while Campbell watched, making sure the wounds would scar permanently. He wanted me marked, Graham said, touching the scars absently. Wanted everyone to see what happened to people who interfered with his business. And Elizabeth married him a month later. I tried to stop it, but she begged me not to. Said he'd kill her father if I intervened again. Graham's expression was hollow. She died 6 months into the marriage, officially pneumonia, but I saw her 2 weeks before she passed. She had bruises around her throat that matched the size of Campbell's hands. Jasmine felt sick. I'm sorry. I swore I'd destroy him. But Campbell is careful. He has connections, powerful friends, ways of making accusations disappear. I've spent 5 years gathering evidence, building a case that even his allies can't ignore. He looked at her directly. When you ran from that church, I saw a chance to hit him where it would hurt most. His pride, his sense of ownership. I'm not proud of using you that way, but you're not sorry either. No, because it kept you safe, and that matters more than my conscience. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Jasmine spoke. The Royal Masquerade is in 2 weeks. Campbell will be there. Half of London will be there. I know. If we're going to make them believe this marriage is real, we need to be seen together, publicly, at the biggest event of the season. Graham studied her carefully. You want to walk into a room full of people who think you're either mad or a social climber who seduced the scared Duke. I want to show Campbell that he didn't break me, that I'm not hiding. Jasmine leaned forward. And I want to help you destroy him. Properly this time. Jasmine, I'm not asking permission. I'm offering partnership. She held his gaze. You have evidence against Campbell. I have something better. I know how he thinks, how he plans. And I know he won't be able to resist trying something at the masquerade. His pride won't allow him to let this go. Graham was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. It was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? I certainly hope so. The royal masquerade was held at the king's palace, a sprawling estate that glittered with 1,000 candles. Jasmine descended from the carriage, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that Mrs. Thornton had commissioned specifically for the occasion. It was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of dress a duchess would wear. The mask covering the upper half of her face was decorated with silver thread and small emeralds that caught the light. Graham wore black, as always, but his mask was simple silver that somehow made his scars more striking rather than less. He offered his arm, and together they climbed the palace steps. "Ready?" he murmured. "No. But let's go anyway." The ballroom fell silent when they entered. Hundreds of masked faces turned toward them, and Jasmine felt the weight of their stares. The whispers started immediately, a low buzz of scandal and speculation that followed them across the marble floor. Graham led her through the crowd with complete confidence, nodding to acquaintances, ignoring the stares. They were announced formally, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood. The title felt strange in her mouth, but she held her head high. They danced first. Graham was surprisingly graceful, leading her through a waltz with practiced ease. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "Half the room is scandalized. The other half is jealous." "And Campbell?" "Near the refreshment table, watching." Jasmine didn't turn to look. "What's he doing?" "Pretending you don't exist. Which means he's planning something." They circulated through the crowd, speaking with various nobles and court officials. Jasmine played her role perfectly, the mysterious new duchess who had captured the heart of London's most notorious bachelor. She smiled at the right moments, deflected intrusive questions with grace, and slowly she felt the crowd's opinion shift. She wasn't a scandal. She was fascinating. It was during the second hour of the ball that Jasmine noticed something wrong. A servant refilling champagne glasses kept glancing toward a side door. Another servant, one she'd seen earlier near the main entrance, was now positioned near the balcony exit. And a third was standing too close to where she and Graham were talking with the French ambassador. "Graham," she said quietly, interrupting his conversation. "Something's wrong." "What do you mean?" "The servants. 3 of them are watching us. And they're not palace staff. Their uniforms don't quite match." Graham's expression sharpened. His eyes swept the room, noting the details she'd spotted. "Campbell's men. He's planning something. An ambush, maybe. Or..." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "The balcony. If they corral us out there, away from witnesses, we leave. Now." Graham took her arm, already moving toward the main exit. But as they turned, one of the false servants dropped his tray. The crash of breaking glass drew everyone's attention. In that moment of distraction, Torrin Campbell stepped directly into their path, flanked by 2 legitimate palace guards. "Duchess," Torrin said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "How lovely to see you. I was just telling these gentlemen about the circumstances of your marriage to the Duke." Graham's hand tightened on Jasmine's arm. "Move, Campbell. I'm simply concerned for the lady's welfare. You see, there are rumors that the Duke here coerced Miss Anderson into marriage, that he used her family's debts to force her hand." Torrin's smile was poisonous. "I've brought documentation proving that Graham Johnston held financial leverage over the Anderson family at the time of your supposed wedding." "That's a lie," Jasmine said, but her voice sounded weak, even to her own ears. "Is it? The Duke himself can confirm he owned your father's debts. The timing is rather convenient, don't you think? A penniless girl fleeing one marriage, only to be immediately claimed by the man who holds her family's future in his hands." Torrin looked at the growing crowd. "I'm merely suggesting that perhaps the lady wasn't given a real choice, and if that's the case, well, the marriage might not be legal at all." The crowd murmured. Jasmine saw doubt on faces that had been friendly moments ago. This was Campbell's play. He couldn't reclaim her through force, so he was destroying the legitimacy of her marriage to Graham, making her look like a victim who needed rescue. If he succeeded, the king himself might intervene, annul the marriage, and leave her vulnerable. The documents he's referring to were destroyed, Graham said coldly. The debt was forgiven. Convenient timing, Torrens said. And no witnesses to this supposed forgiveness, I imagine? I'm the witness. Jasmine stepped forward, pulling away from Graham's protective grip. Her heart hammered, but her voice came out steady. Graham burned those documents at my request. The debt no longer exists. At your request? Or at his orders? Torrens' expression was sympathetic, calculated to make her look unstable. My dear, it's clear you've been manipulated. No one blames you. The Duke is known for his persuasive methods. The only person who manipulated me was you. Jasmine's voice rose, carrying through the ballroom. You threatened me. You told me what would happen if I disobeyed. You made me feel like I was worth less than the debts my father owed. She looked at the crowd, at the masked faces watching with rapt attention. Graham gave me a choice. You never did. This is absurd, Torrens sputtered. Your Grace, he appealed to one of the palace officials. Surely you can see this woman needs protection from you, Jasmine cut him off. Everyone here knows your reputation, Campbell. Everyone knows what happened to Elizabeth Crawford. Or do you think people don't whisper about how your first wife died 6 months after marrying you? The crowd's murmur changed pitch. Mentioning Elizabeth was dangerous, but Jasmine had calculated correctly. Everyone knew the story, but no one had dared say it publicly. Torrens' face went red. You have no proof of anything, don't I? Jasmine turned to Graham. The ledgers. The ones you've been gathering for 5 years. Graham understood immediately. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Funny you should mention proof, Campbell. I have documentation here of every illegal business dealing you've conducted for the past decade. Bribes, extortion, human trafficking disguised as labor contracts. Should I start reading them aloud, or would you prefer to leave quietly? You're bluffing. The shipment from Calais last March. The girls you claimed were domestic servants. They were 14 years old. Graham's voice was cold as winter. I have witness testimony, bills of sale, everything needed to bring you up on charges. Torrens' confident expression cracked. You can't prove. I can prove all of it, and I will. The only question is whether you want that conversation to happen here, in front of the king and half of Parliament, or whether you'd like to retain some dignity and disappear. For a moment, Jasmine thought Torrens would fight. His hand moved toward his coat, and she saw Graham tense, ready for violence. Then, smoke began seeping under the balcony doors. Someone screamed. The smoke thickened rapidly, and Jasmine realized with horror that this was Campbell's backup plan. If he couldn't discredit the marriage legally, he'd create chaos and use it to separate her from Graham. Fire! Someone shouted. The crowd began to panic, pushing toward the exits. Graham grabbed Jasmine's hand. Stay close to me. But the crush of people separated them almost immediately. Jasmine was swept toward the balcony doors by the panicking crowd. She tried to fight against the tide, but there were too many people, all shoving and screaming. Strong hands grabbed her from behind, yanking her sideways. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth. Through the smoke and chaos, she caught a glimpse of her captor's face, one of Campbell's false servants. He was dragging her toward a side corridor, away from the main exits. Jasmine bit down hard on his hand. The man cursed and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free. She ran blindly through the smoke, her lungs burning, no idea where she was going. She burst through a door and found herself on a servant's staircase. Behind her, she heard footsteps, multiple sets. Campbell had sent more than one man. Jasmine ran up the stairs, her dress tangling around her legs. She reached a landing and made a split-second decision, diving through another door into what looked like a private study. She locked the door and looked around frantically for another exit. There was only a window. 3 stories up, the door handle rattled. Then something heavy slammed against it. The wood cracked. Jasmine ran to the window and looked down. A narrow ledge ran along the exterior wall, leading to a balcony about 15 feet away. It was insane. She'd never make it. The door splintered. She climbed out onto the ledge. The drop below made her dizzy. She pressed her back against the wall, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough stone. The wind whipped her dress around her legs. She inched sideways, not looking down, focusing only on the balcony ahead. Behind her, she heard voices in the study. She went out the window. Jasmine moved faster. Her foot slipped on the narrow ledge, and for a terrifying second, she felt herself falling. Her hands caught the stone, nails breaking, but she held on, pulled herself back, kept moving. She reached the balcony and hauled herself over the railing, just as a hand grabbed at her dress from the window. The fabric tore, but she was over, safe. The balcony doors opened. Graham stood there, his mask gone, his scarred face stark with fear that melted into relief when he saw her. Jasmine. He pulled her inside, into a room full of palace guards and officials. Thank God. Campbell's men, she gasped. They tried to take me. I know. We caught 2 of them downstairs. Graham wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She was shaking violently, adrenaline making her entire body tremble. The fire was started deliberately. Campbell's backup plan. Is everyone safe? The fire was small, contained to one room, but in the chaos, Campbell disappeared. A palace official approached, bowing slightly. Your Grace, we've secured the building. Mr. Campbell was seen leaving through the servants' entrance. We can pursue. Let him go, Graham said. For now, he's revealed his hand. Everyone saw him orchestrate this. The charges, Jasmine asked, will be filed tomorrow. Between the documents I have and tonight's attack, Campbell is finished. Graham looked at her intently. But you climbed along a 3rd-story ledge. I didn't really have a choice. You always have a choice. You chose to be brave. He touched her face gently, checking for injuries. And you bit a man who tried to kidnap you. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Graham laughed, a sound of pure relief. No, you certainly didn't. They left the palace an hour later, after giving statements and ensuring that legal proceedings against Campbell would begin immediately. The carriage ride back to Blackwood was quiet. Jasmine leaned against Graham's shoulder, exhausted beyond measure. Thank you, she said softly, for teaching me I was worth fighting for. You always were. You just needed to remember it. The next morning, Jasmine woke to find a small box on her bedside table. Inside, resting on velvet, was a ring, heavy gold, set with a dark ruby, engraved with the Blackwood crest, the Duke's signet ring. She found Graham in his study, reviewing documents related to Campbell's upcoming trial. The ring, she said, holding up the box. Graham looked up. For once, he seemed almost nervous. It's traditionally given to the Duchess of Blackwood, the real Duchess, not just someone playing a role. We were playing a role, Jasmine said carefully. Were we? Graham set down his pen. Because somewhere between burning those documents and watching you climb along that ledge, I stopped pretending. I want you here, Jasmine, not as a weapon against Campbell, not as part of some revenge plot, but because you make this cold house feel like something worth coming home to. Jasmine's throat tightened. I want to stay, really stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose you. Choose this. Then the ring is yours, if you want it. She crossed the room and took the ring from the box, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She held out her hand, admiring the way the ruby caught the morning light. How do I look? She asked. Graham stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was achingly tender. Like a duchess, he said. Like someone who belongs here. Like the woman who saved herself and decided to let me come along for the ride. Jasmine laughed, pulling him closer. That's a lot to read from a ring. I'm good at reading between the lines. Then read this. She kissed him, gentle at first, then deeper. When they finally pulled apart, Graham was smiling that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Welcome home, Duchess," he said. "Welcome home, Duke." Outside, London was waking to news of Campbell's disgrace. The story would spread through society like wildfire. The trial would be a spectacle. But inside Blackwood Hall, two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances were building something entirely new, something chosen, something free, something that felt surprisingly like love. Jasmine looked down at the ring on her finger, at the crest that now marked her as part of this strange, scarred, beautiful family of two. She had run from one life straight into another, but this time she had run towards something instead of away from it. And that, she thought, made all the difference. If you made it this far, you've walked every step of Jasmine's journey with us. From a terrified bride in a carriage to a duchess who chose her own fate. From hiding in the shadows to standing in the light. This is what Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles is all about: stories where the broken find strength, where the trapped find freedom, where endings become beginnings. But here's the thing. This channel only works if you're here with us. Every subscribe, every like, every comment telling us where you're watching from, that's what keeps these stories alive. That's what tells us you want more nights like this, more characters who fight back, more love stories that don't come easy but mean everything when they finally arrive. So if Jasmine's courage moved you, if Graham's redemption meant something, if you want to see more stories where the underdogs don't just survive but thrive, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't wait. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear a story about choosing yourself, about finding allies in unexpected places, about becoming the person you were always meant to be. Hit that notification bell. Join the family, because the best stories are the ones we experience together. Welcome to Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. We're just getting started.